Hello and welcome to Cuppa with a Scientist, a podcast by Loughborough University that will interview a different scientist each episode about their academic journey to the top. We will discuss how they went from a confused teenager choosing early career subjects such as A-levels to a leader in their field, with plenty of weird and wonderful stories in between and golden nuggets of advice for those aspiring to get into science. As well as keeping your ears and brain entertained, we hope this podcast will dispel the myth that all scientists wear white lab coats and give you an insight into how vast the world of science really is. And because the makers of this show are painfully British, we'll be doing it all over a good cuppa. But before we get started, a quick bit about your host. I'm Meg and I'm a PR and Communications Officer at Loughborough University, and I'm also an aspiring scientist. I made the tough decision to return to university last year to pursue my love of biology, and I found podcasts to be an incredibly helpful resource when making that decision, though slightly field specific. From health sciences to social sciences, we'll cover it all in this podcast and show you how vast science really is. And hopefully you'll pick up a few tips and tricks along the way to help you on your journey to becoming a scientist. So, stick the kettle on and settle in. Joining us for today's episode is Dr. Kinga Morsanyi, a senior lecturer in Mathematical Cognition in Loughborough University's Mathematics Education Centre. Kinga's research concerns the development of mathematical abilities and mathematics anxiety, and the contribution of reasoning skills to mathematics performance. She is also interested in how effective and motivational states influence maths and reasoning abilities, and how maths and reasoning skills can be improved by training, but more on all of that later. Hi Kinga, welcome to the show. First of all, the important question, what mug have you gone for today?
Yeah, I've got this. Can you see it?
Yeah.
It's a mug from a friend. She went on holiday to Cyprus, and I really like it. I think I got it 10 years ago.
Oh wow!
And I'm still using it. I really like it. I also went to Cyprus on a holiday at some point, and it's just a nice memory.
Nice and
I've got
mug.
Yeah, and I've got some mint tea with me. Okay. So I have a toddler, so I'm breastfeeding. So I can only have decaf drinks at the minute.
I've gone for slightly less, well, I guess it's still colourful. I've got a sausage dog mug today that says hello sausage on it. Something cheerful because it's quite grey today. And actually I'm drinking an energy drink inside of it. I've not got tea. Whereas you're on decaf, I'm highly caffeinated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. At least one of us has
I've got enough energy for you, don't worry. And we've also asked you to bring an artifact with you that relates to your work. What have you gone for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've got, actually I brought two. Okay. So you can tell me if it's too much.
No.
This one is a book which I edited. I don't know if you can see it very well. So this is about thinking, reasoning, and decision making in autism. Mm-hmm. And you can see my name. Yeah. And also Ruth Byrne, who worked with me on this project. And I just wanted to show this because, so one thing is that when I was a child, I was really a keen reader. You know, I always like to read books, and I always thought, you know, if you see a person's name on a book, they must be really famous. And I think it's just a really nice feeling to have a book with my name on. Of course, I also wrote chapters in other books, but this is the first one that I actually have my name on the cover. And also, it's really special because Ruth is like a living legend of cognitive science.
Oh,
so
that's really cool.
To have this collaborative project with her, it was really a big experience. And actually, I co-authored the introductory chapter with Ruth, and then I also co-authored a chapter with Keith Holyoke, who's another living legend of cognitive psychology. So that's for me, this is a fantastic experience. And actually, I wanted to show you another book as well. Which is this one. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, I can see it.
So again, this has my name on it, but in very small letters, so you probably don't see it. And I guess like the fact that I'm also in a book which was published in French.
Yeah. So can you speak French?
No, I'm actually trying to learn a little bit, but no, I don't. I never learned French at school. I only started when I already finished school, so I never actually went to a French course. I'm really just doing it in my own free time when I have some free time. Yeah.
Oh,
So
they're great. They're really great.
so anyway, I just love books, and it's just good to have books.
So do you feel famous now you've got your name on a book?
No, I realized that actually anybody can have the name on a book if they really want to. But anyway, it's just nice to have also this experience to edit a book.
They're brilliant. Thank you for showing those to us. So let's get into the show. So you're an expert in cognitive and developmental psychology, and your focus is mathematical cognition. Can you explain what that means, please, for somebody that may have never come across this research area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess cognitive psychology is about basically anything that your brain does. Okay, so I mean, thinking, remembering, how you attend to things and notice things in your environment. Yeah, how you perceive things around you, how you see, how you can hear things, how you, for example, process different accents in a language, and all of this. So it's a really how you imagine things. So it's a really diverse research area, but really focused on the processes inside your brain. And if you are also a developmental psychologist, you are interested in how these maybe sometimes really complex cognitive skills develop across the lifespan. So how you, as you grow up, how these processes changes, and how you develop certain skills that you don't have to start with. And I guess when you focus on mathematical cognition, then then you still you are still interested in how people can remember things and how they imagine things. So for example, spatial images are really important for mathematics. So kind of you try to put together your knowledge to understand better how people process numbers and how they work with numbers.
Why would you say this is an important area of study? I mean, people have been doing, I guess, maths for forever. What for those people that are like, do we not know all we need to know about how we learn maths? What would you say to that?
I'm not really aware how much we are surrounded by numbers in our everyday life. So basically everything that you do, you look at your watch, you know that, okay, I have to be ready by 10:30 to do this interview, for example. I have to, when you are cooking, you have to measure the ingredients, you have to measure the time. Maybe you are doing two things at the same time, so you have to switch between, how much time I have left. I have to finish something before I can maybe mix all the ingredients and so on. Mm-hmm. So even in very simple everyday situations, we are always dealing with numbers. And I guess this is the reason as well that numerical knowledge is only linked to people's quality of life. So people with higher levels of numeracy, so I guess it's obvious that you have better career options available for you. Mm. So some careers you cannot do if you don't have a high level of numeracy, and also in these professions you often earn more money. But that's not just so. Even at very simple levels, if you don't have a high enough level of or good enough numeracy level, you will have problems with understanding, why you should get vaccinated, for example, or even just to get the right dose of your medication if you are ill, or following instructions when you use a machine. So in many situations, people with lower levels of numeracy, they are more likely to have accidents. They might have problems if they have a specific treatment for an illness and they have to follow instructions and so on. So it has an impact on many different aspects of your life.
Yeah, that's I never realized, that was the case. It really, it really does it's a foundation for the rest of your life, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, I think one of the main foundations.
So do you find that there are any misconceptions or assumptions people make around what you study and your role? I know, for example, I spoke to you many moons ago and I thought you were a mathematician. You quite rightly corrected me. Does that happen to you often? Do people ask you some unusual questions?
No, I think as a psychologist, it's quite common that people think that, you look at them, you listen to them, and you know what they are thinking, and you know what's in their heart. And no, it's not like that. And also, more specifically, when people hear that I'm working on mathematical cognition, maybe they think that, if their child has a problem with mathematics, I know what they should do to help them and so on. And of course, we try to find out what people should do in these situations, but it's not like we have all the answers. And also so I guess my students sometimes have the same idea as you, that when I offer a project to dissertation students and I say, I'd like you to do something related to mathematical cognition, then often they say, oh, I'm not so good at maths, so maybe this project is not for me. But really, when we do projects on children's mathematics understanding, it's really basic maths. And even if you wanted to do something about mathematicians thinking about proofs, for example, you still don't have to understand the proofs themselves. You are interested in the psychological processes involved. So yeah, for to do something similar to me, you don't have to be very, very good at maths.
I suppose that's similar to my role in PR. I mean, I don't have to understand the ins and outs of everybody's papers, just how they've got there, and the kind of surface level of it. I don't have to be an expert in that field, and I guess you don't have to be an expert in mathematics to be able to do the cognitive side of things, which is really interesting. So let's discuss more about your research later on. I just want to take it back a little bit because I find it really interesting to find out how people got to where they are today. So did you always want to be a psychologist when you were growing up, or did you have a different career in mind?
No, actually, I first, for a long time, I wanted to be a GP.
Okay.
Yeah, my grandma was a GP and also my aunt. And I was just really fascinated by the stories that they told about, like what happens in their surgery and, what kind of cases they have. And so I was really attracted to that career path until I got to secondary school and I studied biology, and somehow I just didn't find it interesting enough. I know you do a degree in biology, and
I'm biased.
So actually, what happened is, in the end, I first studied biology at university. So I kind of pursued this interest, but I couldn't go to medical school because I just didn't put in the effort to be good enough. I didn't study hard enough for that. And so I started a course in biosciences, and then I realized, no, I'm really not that interested in this. Okay. And I guess what might be relevant to students who are considering doing psychology, I think I had a strong interest in studying physics. I really liked physics. I kind of liked the maths, but I guess physics was much more interesting for me. And at the same time, I really liked literature. And I really liked arts. So I think for me it was a difficult decision. Like, what should I study with this this combination of interests? And I think psychology is brilliant because it really combines. It's really a hard science, but you also have this strong humanities and social sciences aspect. So in the end, I think I found an area which really combined things that I was interested in. And maybe a kind of interesting, moderately interesting thing about me is that I also published a book of poetry. So I was interested in that as well. And also when I was at university, I studied social anthropology and translation studies.
Okay.
So I was also considering becoming a professional translator.
Wow. A proper
and yeah, I'm still thinking sometimes that there are some books that are only published in English and there's no Hungarian version, that it would be nice to translate them into Hungarian, like maybe some popular science books. But yeah, I don't really have the time, so it's more like maybe when I retire.
One day. So just going back a bit, so are you from Hungary, and is obviously I'm assuming you went to university in Hungary as well, but is the university system there different from the UK? So do you get to study multiple subjects and then specialize? Because I know you just kind of mentioned you kind of dipped your toe in quite a few different areas.
Yeah. No, I think now the system is much more similar to the rest of Europe. So you have a 3-year undergraduate course, and in Hungary you have a master's course for 2 years. When I did my degree, it was a 5-year course. So you only graduated after 5 years. You didn't have anything like after 3 years. It's basically you finish all the foundation parts of your course. And then you specialize in certain things. And at that point, I specialized in cognitive neuropsychology. So in the final 2 years, I focused on this. But so it's a little bit similar to doing a master's course. But at that point, it was just one degree course. But what I also had, and what I really enjoyed, so that's why I did all the modules on translation studies and social anthropology. So we had a choice of, so each year we had a certain amount of credits that we had to get from other courses. So we could just pick and mix, or we could choose something which is more focused. So you could have like a postgraduate, or not postgraduate, like some kind of a certificate in a certain subject. Okay. Yeah, so I also did that. Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. It was really diverse. And yeah, so I just want to mention something which was really interesting, like a big coincidence, that I did my dissertation in Hungary on people with aphasia. So people who have some kind of brain injury, like a stroke, for example, and they lose their ability to speak. So my dissertation was focused on the question whether if you lose your ability to speak, to what extent you can still reason like at a high level. So without the words, can you still solve problems? Can you still give the answer to some reasoning problems? And when I did my dissertation, I was really fascinated by a theory which is called the dual process theory. And it doesn't matter so much, but actually what happened is that I moved to the UK after I finished my degree, just to do a job which was meant like just a short time job. I moved to Cornwall for this job, and then I thought I was really interested in doing a PhD, so I applied for a PhD position at the University of Plymouth, which was the closest university to where I was. And so the person who basically accepted me for a PhD was the same person who was involved in this dual process research. So the main paper that I cited or the paper that I cited the most in my dissertation, actually the person was in Plymouth. So and even at the point when I applied for this position, I still didn't realize it. So because for some reason I thought maybe he's working at some university at the US, and so I went to Plymouth, and I got to work in the research group of this exact same person whose paper really inspired some of my work in Hungary. So it's a big coincidence, and it was just
but
and it turned out that Plymouth was like almost the center of the universe in terms of reasoning research at that point. So I got to see all the big names, and they came there for meetings and conferences and so on. So it was a really inspiring and really nice place to be. And I guess the University of Plymouth is not what you hear about so much all the time, but for this area of research, it was really, like, I can say probably the best in the world at that time.
Yeah, sounds like you ended up in the right place at the right time. So that's great.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because a few years later, this person retired, and so now a lot of the people who were there, they moved to other places. So this reasoning group doesn't exist anymore in Plymouth. But for a short time, it was really a fantastic place for this kind of research.
So after you got your PhD, what was next for you? Did you work at Plymouth? Did you come straight to Loughborough? I'm just interested how we got to today's role.
Yeah. So actually, after my PhD, I moved to the University of Geneva.
Oh, okay.
And for a postdoc position. And again, I'm interested in the history of psychology, and that was also an interesting place because Jean Piaget used to work there. So if you are studying psychology, for other people, maybe his name doesn't say too much, but Jean Piaget is a really central person in cognitive development research. And I just want to mention something which was fantastic for me is that he has a very famous task, which is about 3 mountains. So so he was interested in how children develop their skills of, for example, how they develop the skill of taking another person's perspective. And so he identified different stages of cognitive development. So how they get to the point that they understand another person can have different views and they don't see the same thing as they do. And so one of his famous tasks is called the 3 mountains task, where he used a little model of mountains. You put a little doll in this model to different places and ask the child what the doll can see from where it stands. Okay, so on the top of one mountain you have a cross, and on the top of another mountain you have a little hut, and so on. And so when I moved to Geneva, Lake Geneva is just outside Geneva, and it's surrounded by big mountains. And I just looked at the mountains and I recognized that actually these are the mountains that he had in his task. So and also my boss, so the professor that I worked with, he was the director of Jean Piaget archives in Geneva. So actually they had all his notebooks and all these artifacts. So that was also really interesting. But actually I only stayed there for 7 months, and then after that I got funding to move to Cambridge. So I applied for an early career fellowship, and then it was just too nice to to say no to. So in the end I only stayed for 7 months in Geneva, and then I moved back to the UK to do a postdoc in Cambridge.
Okay.
And after that, so I stayed there. This was just for funding for 1 year, and then I moved to Queen's University in Belfast, where I started the lecturing position. And after that, I moved here to Loughborough.
How have you found it traveling so much? Has it been enjoyable getting to see all different parts of the world and having your career take you there?
Yeah, I think so moving for your job, it can be hard because I had my husband when I left Plymouth, he stayed there, so we lived apart for more than 2 years in this period when I did my postdoc positions. So it's not so good. I would say. Of course, you enjoy, you meet new people, and if you move to a group with a focused research interest, there's always some new things to learn, new ways of approaching problems. So I think it's really useful for a young aspiring scientist to work in different places and see different approaches to the same problems. but then I think personally it's also difficult. And if people have families as well, or children who go to school, so it can be difficult to balance between your personal and professional lives.
Pros and cons, I guess, for everything, but yeah, especially with traveling so much, I can imagine it's great in some respects, but really difficult in others. So we've discussed quite an academic journey there. You've shared some fun standout moments, but are there any other kind of fun experiences that you had during that journey that you wouldn't necessarily have expected when you first started working in higher education or studying in higher education?
I think so. I mentioned at the start that I got to collaborate with some really superstars of of my research field, and yeah, I think that's amazing. That it's really like in some way it's like a village, that you get to know other people who are working in your area, and you get to talk to them at conferences, and sometimes. So, for example. Once I had this experience, actually somebody from Cyprus emailed me and asked me about a project that I was working on, and so I googled his name, and it came up. It said he's the former Minister of Education in Cyprus. He's also a cognitive developmental psychologist, but so I think it's really. It's a friendly and democratic environment, in a sense that you get to know people who sometimes have very important positions, and so I think that's really interesting and really nice about my.
So we've kind of touched on, obviously the moving around was quite difficult, but have there been any other points during that career where you've faced some difficulties or lows where you've been kind of like, this is really hard?
Yeah, I think when you're a young scientist, so it's really it's competitive to become a professional academic. So especially at the start, you are competing for jobs with so many other people, and when you apply for grants, you sometimes the success rate is really low, like maybe just 5% of the projects are funded, and so on. So probably I didn't imagine that it would be so competitive, and you have to work so hard, to progress with your career. And also that sometimes research positions are really just for 1 year or 2 years. So it's really like you start to work on a project, but almost immediately you have to think about, okay, but what will I do next? So it doesn't matter how successful you are with your projects, because you need time to build up your portfolio. So you need to be in this profession for many years before you can say, okay, now I established myself as a scientist and as an academic.
And is your field, is it female dominated, male dominated? Is it a good mix?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So for reasoning research, I mentioned this very famous professor who was Jonathan Evans, and I guess when I moved to Plymouth, I really enjoyed this very lively environment of reasoning research, but it was very much a male-dominated field, and in fact, it was dominated by male professors, like older men. So I think it can be a bit intimidating for like a young woman, and especially when you are still a PhD student, when you are still kind of learning. Like at meetings, sometimes I wanted to say something, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't say this, maybe it's just completely silly, and so it can be difficult if you don't really have female role models in your field. Of course there are a few females, but they look like the exceptions and not like it's accessible for women as well. But at the same time, as a developmental psychologist, so maybe actually this could be one reason that I then started to work more on developmental topics. So if I go to developmental psychology conferences, that's very much a female-dominated field, and sometimes it's much more easier to talk to people and to develop projects with them and so on, and just to make contact as a person. But at the same time, if you are a female in a male-dominated field, people remember you. So that's a good thing about it. That there are not so many females, so maybe you don't remember all the men who are working in the field. But if there are just a few females, then you recognize them and you remember them. So I think there are advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, every cloud and all that. So now you're part of the Loughborough family. You joined us last year, I think. So what does your typical week, month look like?
Basically, I have a lot of different roles, a lot of different tasks, and I'm continuously switching between different things. So I have my teaching, I have meetings with project students, I have meetings with PhD students. I'm also a journal editor, so I'm receiving papers that I have to evaluate. I'm trying to work on some papers myself and some grant applications, and also I have some admin duties relating to developing. So, for example, I'm developing a new course, and I'm in a new module within a course, but also the course itself is new, and so I'm working on these as well. So yeah, it's really varied, I would say.
Yeah. I was about to say, my next question is it quite varied? But I think you've answered that quite confidently there. So let's talk research now then. So you're part of the fairly new Mathematics Education Centre. Could you please tell us a bit more about the centre, please, and what it's looking to achieve?
Yeah, so the Maths Education Center, I think it's not that new. I think it existed for some time, but I'm actually part of, within the Maths Education Center, there's the Center for Mathematical Cognition, which was actually launched just last year. And so this is a new center which was established with funding from Research England. And so basically the funding was for recruiting new staff who are all working in this area. So the idea was to try and create a center which has a large number of people working on similar topics, and to try to raise the profile of this research area, and also to get people to collaborate and to apply for grants together. So, for example, now we are applying for another big grant together as a center. And I would also say that actually this is the biggest center for mathematical cognition in the world. So again, I'm kind of feeling that I'm more or less at the best, in the best possible place in the world to do what I'm doing.
I'm biased, but yeah, Loughborough is the best. So we can make that claim.
I like the university as well. I also like the setting and all the sports ground and all the open spaces. Like I think the outdoor spaces are fantastic, and the campus is really nice.
It's a really nice place.
And also I should also mention that actually Loughborough has one of the best psychology courses in England. I think it's within the top 10, and so that's also a nice thing that the students who come to study here are really motivated and really proud to be here.
Cool. Let's talk more about your research. I'm going to refer to my notes for this now. So I've gone through your research profile and just kind of pulled out a few sentences, and I'm hoping we can discuss more about what they mean and some of the projects that you have previously or are working on in that area. Okay, so first bit, I've got that your research concerns the development of mathematical abilities and mathematics anxiety and the contribution of reasoning skills to mathematics performance. So could you kind of break down what that means, please, and some examples of research in that area?
Yeah, I mean, it means a lot of things. So maybe it's easier if I tell you about some of the projects that I'm working on at the minute. So I have a PhD student who's trying to develop a screener for developmental dyscalculia. So developmental dyscalculia is something similar to what dyslexia is for reading. So I guess everybody knows about dyslexia, and some people struggle to learn to read and to understand texts and how different parts of texts relate to each other and so on. And so you have something similar for numbers as well. That it can happen that some people just really struggle to process numerical information and learn mathematics and remember facts, arithmetic facts, but it can be also other procedures. And so one line of my work really focuses on dyscalculia. So something that Alison, who's doing this PhD project, Alison Ralston, she's trying to do is to develop a screener that could identify children in the first years of primary school. So because actually dyscalculia is very rarely diagnosed, like officially. Usually children are picked up to have like some cognitive or learning problems, but they are usually not specifically diagnosed with dyscalculia. But even this usually happens when they are in year 4 or year 5, so towards the end of primary school. And we thought it would be really useful to have some kind of a way of identifying children who are very likely to develop these problems later, and then to maybe alert teachers to say, okay, maybe you should provide some intervention or just give a bit more attention to these children, because maybe with some intervention they could avoid developing these problems later. So this is one idea. And then I'm also working on a web-based resource, again, to identify dyscalculia, but also to try and provide intervention. And this is something completely new. So I did a lot of studies before where we had like computer-based tasks to assess math skills, for example, but developing like a resource, like an app to do intervention and assessment is a completely different thing, because the whole thing has to form like a coherent package, and it has to have a coherent design and so on. So it's much more complicated than you would first think. So I'm working on this as well. Then I have another PhD student who's working on intuitive logic, and it's also related to mathematics learning. So she's focusing on students who are learning core maths, which is some kind of, it's kind of an alternative to doing A-level maths. So core maths is something which is related to everyday situations where you need maths, and more focused on, like how you manage your finances, for example, how you do some modeling, but based on real life data. And so what previous work has found that students who study post-compulsory mathematics, so A-level mathematics, for example, by doing this, they also develop some more general reasoning skills. So they become more logical in their thinking, but not just related to maths, but at a more abstract level as well. And so now what she's looking into, she's called Charlie Campbell, and she's looking into this idea that maybe what you develop is not just logical thinking, but logical intuitions as well. So to be able to intuitively identify things that make sense or don't make sense without doing all the computations, and to somehow kind of educate your intuition by learning mathematics.
Yeah,
and then
that's really interesting project. That is.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic, and I really like it because it really combines my interest in reasoning and mathematics. And then there's another project that I co-supervise. The student is called Bustang, and he's from Indonesia, and he's done some work on Indonesian students and their teachers' conceptions and misconceptions of probability. And that's very interesting as well. And also, especially that he also looked at the teachers' misconceptions. So sometimes the teachers themselves don't understand some concepts that they are teaching at school. And the funny thing is that sometimes the teachers and the students have exactly the same misconceptions. The only difference is that the teachers are much more confident that they are right than the students.
Wow, a real range of projects going on, but really interesting. So moving on to the kind of next bit, we may have already covered this in some of those projects, and let me know if we need to move on to the next question after that. So also on your profile, it states you're interested in affective and motivational states and how they influence maths and reasoning abilities, as well as people's decisions, and how maths and reasoning skills can be improved by training. We may have covered some of those already, but what do you mean by affective and motivational states, and what kind of work are you doing in this area?
Okay, so maybe I should start by saying that people who are anxious about maths might be actually quite good at maths. So it's not the same thing to be bad at maths and to be anxious about maths. But for some reason, some people have really low confidence in their maths ability, and they really think, oh, I'm not a maths person. I'm not so good with numbers and so on. This line of work looks into the effects of maths anxiety if you try to separate it from maths knowledge. So basically, if you take two people with exactly the same level of maths knowledge, but one of them is confident and the other one is anxious, then you often find that the person who's anxious will end up with worse results, for example, worse exam marks, worse outcomes or they just don't apply for some jobs because they don't feel confident enough, and so on. So in a lot of cases, although they have exactly the same ability, the same knowledge of the procedure, but one person will be disadvantaged in their life choices and their outcomes. So I'm really interested in maths anxiety. And actually, when I mentioned my current project, I just want to mention one more very quickly, which is actually related to maths anxiety. So this project is looking into maths anxiety and statistics anxiety, because a lot of students, I think it's really relevant to students who are considering studying psychology, because I know that some students are put off by the fact that you have to study statistics at a reasonably high level to become a psychologist. And anyway, so we are looking at maths anxiety and statistics anxiety and try to find out if these are the same or not the same. But the interesting thing is that this is part of a big project where I think more than 100 universities from all over the world are collaborating. Wow, so we are not just trying to find it out if it's the case for students in Loughborough. We are not coordinating this project. We are only participants, so it's not my idea. But I just wanted to mention this because I think it's really exciting to have participants from more than 40 countries. So really from all over the world, from Asia, from maybe even from Africa. I think there are a few African countries, but definitely North and South America, Australia, really all around Asia. So and Europe, of course. So it's really a big project, and it will be really interesting to have. Well, it will be a lot of data, but also to have this comparison. How much findings in the UK replicate in other cultural context. So it's a UK-based project, but it's just not led by us.
That's really interesting. And in terms of, I did A-level maths, and statistics was by far my least favourite module. So I'll be interested to see what the results are for that. I
think statistics is difficult if you are not working with real data. I think once you have your own data and once you actually want to answer a question, then it becomes really like your favorite game.
yeah, I can imagine that. So just kind of keeping on the theme of maths anxiety, we've worked together on a piece about what a fear of maths does to children. Could you tell me a bit more about that specific research project that we worked on and what your findings were about what it does to children?
Yeah, so I think so one thing which was special about this project is that it was with really young children. So the participants were just 6 years old, it's a cross-cultural study, but not at the same level as the big study that I just mentioned. So we had participants from the UK and participants from Italy. But I think it's still nice to have a comparison of between at least two different educational contexts. And there are big differences as well, because we did this study in Northern Ireland, where children start school at the age of 4. And in Italy, they start school at the age of 6. So in Northern Ireland, the children who participated, they were already in year 4 of primary school, and in Italy, they just started school. But we actually found very similar things. So basically, if you look at maths anxiety, so as I said, maths anxiety can lead to some bad outcomes for people, even if they are reasonably good at maths. But there's a debate about, what is it maths anxiety that drives you to have worse outcomes, or is it, that somehow you are not so good at maths by disposition, and then that's why you become anxious, and that it's kind of a chicken or egg problem, like which comes first. And so I think this study is important because we looked at at the very start of education, when you first learn about mathematics, is it the case that first of all, do children at this age already feel anxious about maths? So this was one question, and yes, to some extent they do. They are not super anxious about maths, but they do feel anxiety. But the main finding of this study was that actually, if you are anxious, you learn less at school. So you listen to the teacher, but maybe you don't process the information in the same way. So in the end, you will miss some information. So when you cover some new topics, and this can be, for anxious children, this can be anxiety provoking to be presented with, you just learned something and you practiced it, and now you are kind of confident, and then you move on to the next topic and you know nothing. And, so it's an anxiety provoking situation. But actually what we found is that children who are anxious, they actually learn less about these topics. So if you imagine this happening over and over again, you can see how maths anxious children actually accumulate gaps in their knowledge. And so what might happen is that you end up with a person who had the potential to become really good at maths, but maybe they end up being just average because of their anxiety, because they missed some pieces of information, and also didn't practice at home because they were anxious, they had negative feelings about maths, and so on. So if you imagine that this starts from the age of 6, maybe, or even maybe before then, you can imagine that there are children who really miss out on becoming good at maths and pursuing careers in this field, for example.
What do you think the answer is to kind of, well, not eliminating but easing maths anxiety? Is that something you're looking at as well, or are you just kind of looking at the problem itself at this point?
What we said, we wrote some articles about this topic in more popular science outlets. So for example, in the Conversation with your help. And I guess you try to give advice to people. And one thing is that maths anxiety doesn't start at school. So I think the fact that children in Italy already had some level of maths anxiety, which was actually similar to the level of maths anxiety in the other group, it means that they already developed some negative feelings about maths before they went to school. So I have a toddler who's 21 months old, and he's already counting, he's already asking me about, the number symbols and so on. So children, I think they have a genuine curiosity in numbers. And I think it can be really a bad thing if the parents are like, oh, numbers, I really don't like maths. And, like if they kind of transfer, maybe not consciously or not intentionally, but they transfer these ideas to children, or that maths is difficult. So I think this is one advice. That there's another question, like what you do when children are already anxious. But I think the first question is what you can do so that they develop more positive attitudes, and that they retain this kind of curiosity about numbers, and and this openness to learn about numbers. I think that's more important. And actually, so people, like when we started this conversation, I said numbers are everywhere, and people often don't realize that, for example, when you play board games, the children have to, they learn like what is 6 or what is 5, and how far you can go with your pawn in a board game if you have 5 or 6 on the dice. So they learn about numbers in these very informal ways as well. Or when they help you to cook something and you need 2 eggs or 3 eggs, they can help you with cooking. So there are many opportunities to engage them with informal maths activities, which could help them to develop this understanding. And also, of course, maths is not just numbers, but also shapes, and that they recognize shapes. And again, I can say that even toddlers are really good at so like my toddler recognizes a rectangle, and first he called it like a roof. And now he also learned the word rectangle. So they can do amazing things if you encourage them and if you have this positive attitude.
Great. So just going, and obviously you've shown us the book at the beginning, but one of the other questions I've got is, you've looked at the development of reasoning skills in typical development and in special populations, including autism, which is obviously what the book was on. Could you tell us a bit more about your research in that area?
When I did my PhD, I looked at reasoning heuristics, so intuitive and analytic processes. Intuition is, like responses to problems that just come to your mind without really thinking about them. And analytic processes where you really have to think. And so there's some evidence that people with autism don't develop the same intuitive responses as typically developing people. So that in some cases you look at some problems and immediately you have an answer that comes to mind, and it might be the wrong answer or it can be the right answer, but you have this immediate kind of idea of what's going on. And autistic people sometimes don't have this immediate solution to a problem. And so this is, and then my collaboration with Keith, who was the co-author of this chapter in this book, was about analogical reasoning. Yeah, so basically how you can make connections between different things which are similar in some respects, but they are also dissimilar in other respects. And I guess surprisingly, this is a strength in autism. I mean, surprisingly in the sense that often autistic people's thinking seems really abstract and decontextualized, that they don't take into account some, like, for example, social cues from other people and the environment. And actually, in the case of analogies, they are really good at making connections. So they are really good at seeing patterns and structure. And so I guess my research is on this, like how autistic people, how they are different and how they are similar to other people in their thinking. And I think it might sound quite abstract, but I think it's important in terms of their education and in terms of, again, workplace contexts, like, what kind of tasks are easy for them to do and what kind of tasks they struggle with. And actually, there's not so much research on reasoning and decision making in autism.
What would you say is the most unusual thing you've had to do as part of your career?
It's kind of job related, but I was thinking about this question when you sent it to me. And the first thing that came to mind is when I went to a conference in Amsterdam, and the colleague who lives there, she asked me out for dinner with her colleagues. And she told me, okay, I'll come to pick you up at your hotel. So I was waiting for her, and she arrived on her bike, and she told me to sit at the back, so that she was riding across Amsterdam with me on her bike, and it was really scary because she was riding really fast. And in Amsterdam, bikes always have the right of way, so she had no fear. And then this happened to me, and I thought this was weird. And then the next day I met another colleague and he offered to take me somewhere on his bike as well. But at that point I said no. So, okay, so this is how people live in Amsterdam. This is normal. And then a few months later, I went to Florence to visit a colleague there. And she told me, my husband will come to pick you up at the train station. So just wait there. And he arrived on a bicycle. and he told me to sit at the back of the bicycle. And also I had this wheelie bag with me because I went for a few days. And so the exact same thing happened, that he took me home. But also imagine like Italian traffic, like in a big city. And so I'm sitting on this bike, he's riding very fast across the cobblestone streets, and I'm just dragging my wheelie bag along with me. So, yeah, and this happened like a few months later, but since then, thankfully, it didn't happen again.
No more bikes.
No, not for me.
That's brilliant. That's a great story. So have you got a particular dream or goal in mind for your career that you're working towards?
Yeah, so actually this morning I received an email from a maths teacher who told me that she's going to a lot of professional development events because she's very interested in development of dyscalculia, and she said that my name keeps coming up. I don't know if it's because she's from Northern Ireland, so maybe there many people already know the work that I did on dyscalculia. But I guess so what is a real goal for me for the future that I hope to achieve is to make a difference to people with maths difficulties, and especially because diagnosis rates at the minute are so low, or it's almost like people with maths difficulties don't get diagnosed and they don't get the support. So if you compare them with people with dyslexia, it's kind of incomparable, because people with dyslexia, they get diagnosed, they get good support, they get resources, and people with dyscalculia, they don't have the same. So I have this aim to try and raise awareness, to try and develop resources for them, to try and that's why I'm working on this web-based resource as well, which is really accessible. It will be when it's ready, because people can just download an app on their mobile phone and then use it. I guess my career goal ultimately is to do something that benefits people.
That's a really good goal to have. Really good goal. So what does a cognitive developmental psychologist do in their spare time? Are you still writing poetry?
No. I like to read poetry, but no, I don't write poetry anymore. And I do a lot of writing still, but mostly for my job. Yeah. So as part of my work. But I guess I try to do sports, but I don't really have the time right now. And then I try to learn French that I mentioned to you before. And don't ask me a question in French, because don't test my knowledge, because it's not at a very high level. But I just enjoy this as well. And also I have an interest in archaeology. So when I lived in Ireland, I really liked to visit these ancient monuments or these Celtic monuments, and I really like to do that when I travel, to see these ancient Roman sites and ancient Greek sites, and to see this, the ruins of these cities. And I think it's actually related to my interest in cognitive psychology. What people could create when they didn't have the devices and all the gadgets that they have, or that we have now. Like some things are really similar and some things are really different.
That's it. That's interesting. Yeah, making the link between archaeology and your work. I like that. So what areas of kind of cognitive psychology do you think will be the hot topics for the next generation of psychologists, or students studying at the moment, looking to get into the area that you're in?
Yeah, I think probably we will have a better understanding. So it's all about the brain, but at the minute it's it's very difficult to study the brain. I mean, if brain imaging is extremely expensive, and so maybe there will be some new ways of, seeing more directly what's going on in your brain without having to have a lot of money for doing these scans. And I think another thing which will really change cognitive psychology is the availability of all of these apps and gadgets. Like you can track like where you are going, who you are meeting, how you feel during the day. You might measure your blood pressure or pulse rate, or like all of these things in your phone, so that we can collect data about people's life in a more kind of at a larger scale as well, because everybody will have, or more or less everybody has these devices and these apps. But I think also that we have more possibility to integrate this information. So also I think statistics will develop, and now there are these big data files, like big data is, I think, something that will take over like all areas of science in the future, that you have much more data. So we are used to doing studies with maybe 100 participants, and that's already like testing 100 participants in your lab. That's a lot of work. But potentially you could have access to like millions of people data, and not just they do one task and you analyze their results, but you could follow them over maybe weeks or years as well. So I think probably these are probably technological development will be amazing in the so I mean, we just cannot imagine what will happen in 20 years time or 30 years time.
Yeah, long gone are the days where you're in the library photocopying your journal paper.
Yeah, it seems like ancient times, and yeah, actually, I guess maybe another thing which is, it's more about developmental psychology, not cognitive psychology. Like probably in the future we will understand much better how genetics interacts with environmental influences. So this is an age-old question in psychology. Like, is it more like who you are? Is it because you have particular genes that you inherited from your parents and you meant to be in this particular way, or to what extent you are a person created by your environment? And I think in the future we will also have better understanding of genetics and what is fixed and what can be modified with maybe some interventions or some kind of ways of teaching people to do things, and whether you can do this at a certain age, or whether like there's a sensitive period that if you want to do an intervention you have to do it at that time, or is it like like similar to the idea of lifelong learning, you can have an intervention also when a person is 50 and they will benefit equally to a younger person. So I think this is another area where we will have some exciting developments.
Lots of things to look out for then in terms of developments. So do you have any words of wisdom for people, students aspiring to get into roles like yours, or was there anything you wish you told your younger self?
Yeah, I think to keep motivated, you should follow your interests. So you should do things that you are really interested in, and you shouldn't maybe go into a field because there are always some popular hot topics. That if you work on those, you get more recognition, or it's easier to get research funding. But I think if you just always in this reactive mode, I don't think then you maybe lose your identity. Like I think it's important to have your professional identity, and you to have your own way of doing things. And another thing that I'm still trying to learn is to say no when people come up with ideas for new projects, or when people ask you to, oh, do you want to do this chat with me, Kinga? and then you should say sometimes, like, my diary is full and I really cannot do this, and although this sounds interesting, So I think this is something that you have to learn to do. Otherwise, your life can be really, really stressful because you are really juggling too many things.
That's good advice. Power of the word no. That's good. So why should people consider a career in cognitive developmental psychology?
I don't know. I think cognitive psychology maybe seems abstract, but I think you can use it in so many different contexts. So because it just helps you to understand the world better and how people think. So of course not everybody would want to be an academic, but I think it has a lot of there are a lot of contexts where you can use it. So for example, I know about people who did a PhD in cognitive psychology and then they became debt advisors. How you deal with accumulating debt, what are the good decisions that you can make. I think it really teaches you some skills that you can use in real life context, and also you can use in an advisory or some kind of senior position with a company, for example. And then developmental psychology, again, you can work in a school, you can work in educational context, but you can also work in any area where you get in contact with younger people, and it really helps you to understand their way of thinking and create materials for them, like not just teaching materials, but if you wanted to write a children's book, for example, I think your knowledge of I'm just talking about children's books now. These are the kinds of books that I'm reading now, but I think this knowledge can help you in all different areas of your life. So I think even if you decide that you don't want to be an academic, you have so many career options open for you, and also with your statistics knowledge. So again, you will be good with handling data, and you will be good at asking questions about, when you have a big data file, like how do I go about making sense of what's happening. I think you develop a lot of skills that you can use in other areas of your life as well, or in other job roles as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have a cup of tea and a chat with us. Is there anything you wish to plug before we go? Maybe a Twitter page or a web page or anything like that, or your book?
No, I'm quite happy with just people buying my book if they are genuinely interested. But people can follow me on Twitter.
But thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have too.
Yeah, thanks so much, Meg. It was great.
Thank you all for listening or watching this episode of Cuppa with a Scientist. I hope you found it interesting and will join us again. Do leave a comment and get in touch. I'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts on who you'd like to see on the show. And make sure you don't miss a show by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and other mainstream podcast platforms. You can also subscribe to the Loughborough University YouTube channel if you prefer to watch the show. See you next time for more hot tea and even hotter stories to help you on your way to becoming a scientist.